I had always cherished the quiet, orderly charm of my suburban neighborhood, a little corner of the world where lawns were precisely manicured, homes were painted in soothing shades of beige and blue, and the Homeowners Association, or HOA, ensured that everything remained pristine and predictable. The HOA was strict, sometimes to the point of absurdity, regulating the height of mailbox posts, mandating the exact shade of garden mulch, and enforcing quiet hours with an iron fist. But I didn't mind. In a world that often felt unpredictable, I found comfort in its routine and rules. After years in the military, coming home with the invisible scars of PTSD, I craved stability, and this neighborhood, with its ordered sidewalks and neatly trimmed hedges, provided just that. My service dog, Max, a golden retriever with a heart of gold and the calm presence of a monk, had been my constant companion since my return. Trained to sense the onset of anxiety attacks, he was more than a pet. He was my lifeline, my silent protector, and my steadfast friend. Max's golden coat gleamed in the sunlight, his eyes always watchful but gentle, and his demeanor so patient that even the most high-strung dog owners in the neighborhood respected his quiet confidence. Every day, as part of our routine, Max and I took long walks through the neighborhood. The rhythm of his steps beside me, the gentle tug of his leash, and the soft, familiar feel of his fur under my hand gave me a sense of grounding that was otherwise hard to find. He wore his service vest, bright blue with the words "Service Dog" emblazoned in white, along with my name and a medical alert patch. People generally gave us space, understanding the importance of his role, though a few curious children sometimes asked if they could pet him. I always politely explained that he was working and needed to stay focused. It was a simple life, one I'd worked hard to build after the chaos of deployments, and the endless nights haunted by memories I couldn't erase. It was on one of these peaceful afternoons that I first encountered Karen. She was, by reputation, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp tongue, a penchant for loud floral print dresses, and a hat so large it could have shielded a family of 4 from the sun. Her nails were always perfectly manicured, painted a harsh crimson that seemed to reflect her personality. Sharp, glossy, and unyielding. She lived 2 streets over, in a house that seemed to overflow with wind chimes, garden gnomes, and overly pruned rose bushes. I had seen her before, often glaring at anyone who dared to park their car slightly askew or leave their trash bins out a moment too long. But until that day, she had never directly addressed me. As Max and I approached her property, I noticed her kneeling by her flower bed, a small spray bottle in her gloved hand. She was muttering to herself, fussing over the petunias, but her head snapped up the moment she heard Max's paws patting softly on the sidewalk. Her eyes narrowed, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, calculating how best to assert her authority. "That dog shouldn't be here," she snapped, rising to her full, albeit unimposing height. The irritation in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I stopped, Max obediently sitting by my side. His ears perked but his body relaxed. I kept my tone polite, knowing from experience that escalating situations like this rarely helped. "He's a service dog, Karen. He's allowed anywhere I am." I gestured to his vest, hoping she would see the obvious signs of his official role. Karen's eyes flickered briefly to the vest, but it was clear she either didn't understand or didn't care. Service dog or not, he shouldn't be here scaring the birds and dirtying up the sidewalk. I've seen him sniffing around. "I've told the HOA about this and they're going to fine you." Her voice was rising, drawing the attention of a few neighbors who peeked from behind their curtains. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a warning signal that my anxiety was beginning to stir, but Max nudged my leg gently, grounding me. I took a slow breath. "Karen, Max is trained. He doesn't scare birds and he certainly isn't making a mess. He's here to help me manage my PTSD. The law protects service dogs and I'm well within my rights to walk him here." But Karen's face twisted into a sneer. She took a step closer, raising the spray bottle she'd been holding. I could now see it clearly, a harsh chemical pesticide, the kind used to ward off aphids and other garden pests. "I don't care about your rights," she hissed. "Dogs like that bring diseases. They don't belong in this neighborhood. I'm sick of you people thinking you're special just because you have problems. Maybe if you can't handle living here, you should move." Before I could react, she raised the bottle and sprayed a fine mist directly at Max. The chemical scent hit me instantly, bitter, acrid, stinging my nose. Max yelped, his body jerking away as the pesticide hit his eyes and nose. The leash slipped from my hand in my shock, and he staggered back, pawing desperately at his face. For a moment, everything slowed down. I felt frozen, a scream trapped in my throat, as if the air itself had thickened and I was back in a war zone, paralyzed by the chaos. Karen stood there, triumphant, the spray bottle still raised, a smug expression on her face. "That'll teach you both to stay away," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. It was the sound of Max's whimper that snapped me out of it. My training kicked in and I rushed to his side, gathering him into my arms as best as I could. His fur was damp with the chemical and his eyes were red and watering. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I scooped him up, cradling his trembling body against mine, and without another word, I turned and ran toward my house. My mind was racing, caught between the urgency of getting Max help and the fury bubbling just beneath the surface. Once home, I rinsed Max thoroughly in the bathtub using lukewarm water to wash away the pesticide. He whimpered but remained remarkably still, trusting me to help him. As I dried him with towels, I noticed redness on his skin where the chemical had touched, and I knew I couldn't waste any time. I called the vet immediately, explaining the situation in a rush. They told me to bring him in right away. Driving with one hand on the wheel and the other resting reassuringly on Max's head, I made it to the veterinary clinic in record time. The vet examined him carefully, administering eye drops and soothing ointments, and explained that while the pesticide was irritating and potentially dangerous, Max was strong and would likely recover fully with prompt care. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a searing wave of anger and disbelief. How could someone be so callous, so cruel, as to attack a defenseless animal simply because of her own prejudices? I knew I couldn't let this go. While Max rested in the back seat of my car, I called the police and reported the incident. The dispatcher listened carefully, her voice calm and professional, and assured me that an officer would come to take my statement. I also mentioned that Max was a federally protected service animal, and the dispatcher's tone sharpened with interest. She told me she would notify the appropriate authorities and that I should expect a follow-up soon. As I drove home, the streets of the neighborhood, once so familiar and comforting, felt alien and hostile. I saw a few neighbors peeking through their blinds, whispers no doubt passing between them. Some looked concerned, others merely curious, and a few openly judgmental. But I kept my focus on Max, who was resting quietly, his breathing even, though his eyes still held a hint of discomfort. I knew this was only the beginning. The drive back from the veterinarian's office was a blur of taillights, flashing turn signals, and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of Max lying in the back seat. I could still see the traces of chemical residue clinging to his golden fur, despite the vet's meticulous washing and the application of ointments. His red-rimmed eyes, which once shone with playful curiosity and gentle loyalty, were now dulled with exhaustion and discomfort. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on my chest, and the pounding in my head seemed to echo with each memory of Karen's cruel act. The venom in her voice, the spray of pesticide, the way Max had recoiled in confusion and pain. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the street bathed in a soft twilight, as though the neighborhood itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I carried Max inside, gently laying him on his favorite spot by the window where he could still see the world outside, his tail giving a faint, grateful thump against the carpet. I sat beside him, stroking his damp fur, murmuring soft reassurances I wasn't sure he could fully comprehend but which I needed to say aloud, both for his comfort and to convince myself that everything would be all right. After making sure he was settled and resting, I picked up my phone, my hands trembling not with fear but with a rising tide of determination. This wasn't just about me and Max. This was about what was right. I dialed the non-emergency police number, my voice steady as I explained to the dispatcher what had happened. How a neighbor had deliberately sprayed my federally protected service dog with toxic chemicals. How Max had suffered as a result. How this wasn't a simple neighborly dispute but a violation of federal law. The dispatcher's voice shifted from polite curiosity to sharp concern as I mentioned the Americans with Disabilities Act and the fact that Max wasn't just a pet. He was a medical necessity, an extension of my own ability to function in a world that too often overwhelmed me. She promised to send an officer to take my statement, and within the hour, a patrol car arrived, its lights flashing softly in the dimming evening. Officer Daniels stepped out, his face a study in professionalism, but his eyes held a glimmer of empathy as he listened to my story. I led him inside, introduced him to Max, and showed him the service dog vest, the medical papers, and even the vet's report detailing the chemical exposure. Daniels nodded as he took notes, asking detailed questions about the incident, about Karen's exact words and actions, about any prior tensions or disputes. I told him the truth, that I had always kept to myself, that I'd followed every HOA rule, that Karen's hostility seemed rooted not in anything I'd done but in her own misplaced sense of control and entitlement. Danielle's pen scratched across his notebook as I described how Karen had raised the pesticide bottle and sprayed Max, how she'd muttered her disdain as though my rights and Max's suffering were of no consequence. When he finished taking my statement, Daniels closed his notebook with a firm snap and met my gaze squarely. "This isn't just a neighborhood dispute," he said. "Harming a service animal is a federal offense under the Americans with Disabilities Act. On top of that, there are animal cruelty laws at the state level that apply. I'll make sure this gets escalated." His words, though spoken quietly, carried the weight of authority, and for the first time since the incident, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that justice might be possible. He assured me that he would file a formal report, that the evidence, including the vet's documentation and any available witness statements, would be gathered and that the district attorney's office would be contacted. The next few days unfolded in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Word of the incident spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. Some neighbors knocked on my door, offering quiet words of support and concern, expressing their shock that Karen would do something so heartless. Others, I noticed, kept their distance, their gazes averted when I passed by on walks with Max, as though unsure whether to show solidarity or self-preservation. The neighborhood's social media page lit up with heated debates, some defending Karen as a misunderstood woman merely trying to protect her property and the local wildlife. Others condemning her actions as inexcusable cruelty and a violation of fundamental rights. I tried to tune it out, focusing instead on Max's recovery, but each passing comment, each whispered conversation felt like a reminder of the precarious balance between justice and social politics. One afternoon, a knock at the door revealed a neighbor I hadn't expected, Mrs. Alvarez, a quiet widow who lived 2 houses down and was known for her impeccable flower beds and reserved demeanor. She held a small basket of homemade biscuits in her hands, her gaze kind but cautious. "I heard about what happened," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry. What Karen did was wrong. If you need anything, just let me know." Her words, simple as they were, brought a lump to my throat. I thanked her, accepted the biscuits, and felt a small spark of warmth in the midst of the surrounding chill. But not all interactions were so kind. One morning, as I was walking Max, his steps slower but his spirit unbroken, we encountered Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man who'd always seemed neutral, if a bit gruff. He eyed Max with a scowl and muttered, "Maybe you should keep that dog at home where he belongs." Karen was just trying to protect her garden. The injustice of his words stung, but I held my tongue, unwilling to escalate the confrontation. Max leaned against my leg, his presence a calming anchor amidst the storm of judgment. Then, 3 days after Officer Daniels' visit, my phone rang and the caller ID displayed the district attorney's office. My heart skipped a beat as I answered, my voice tight with anticipation. The woman on the other end introduced herself as an assistant DA and explained, in clear and measured tones, that they had reviewed the police report, the vet's documentation, and the statements provided. "We're pressing charges," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "This isn't just a case of neighborhood tensions. Harming a service animal violates federal law and we have sufficient evidence to proceed. Karen will be charged with animal cruelty under state law and with violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. The penalties are significant and we're treating this case with the seriousness it deserves." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy but comforting blanket. I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion, and she assured me that they would be in touch with further details about the case, including the timeline for Karen's arrest and the upcoming court proceedings. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, Max resting his head on my knee as though sensing the shift in energy. The road ahead would be long, filled with legal hurdles and the discomfort of public scrutiny, but for the first time since the incident, I felt a sense of validation. A reassurance that the law was on my side and that justice was not an abstract concept but a tangible path forward. The morning air was unusually crisp for our neighborhood, the sunlight dappling through the leafy canopies of manicured trees, casting intricate shadows on the perfectly paved sidewalks and pristine driveways. It was the kind of morning that, under normal circumstances, would have brought a sense of peace, a promise of a quiet, uneventful day. But not today. Today, the hum of suburban tranquility was shattered by the low, unmistakable growl of squad cars pulling up outside Karen's immaculate home, their polished hoods glinting under the sun like armored beetles. Red and blue lights flashed rhythmically, painting the white walls of her house in vivid, pulsing hues, and their strobing intensity was reflected in the polished brass of her door knocker, in the panes of her expansive bay window, in the fluttering overwatered petunias lining her walkway. I stood at my window, Max pressed against my leg, his head tilted with quiet curiosity, his large, soulful eyes mirroring my own mix of disbelief and quiet satisfaction. For a moment, the world outside felt suspended in a strange, dreamlike tableau, a neighborhood frozen in time, its carefully curated facades suddenly confronted with the stark, undeniable reality of justice arriving in plain sight. Two uniformed officers emerged from their vehicles, their movements methodical but purposeful. One of them approached the door and knocked firmly while the other stood slightly back, hand resting lightly on his belt as if anticipating resistance. Karen's front door swung open with a sharpness that betrayed her irritation. There she stood, still wearing her garish floral print housecoat, a matching scarf wound hastily around her head, her expression one of mingled confusion and outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice carrying easily across the quiet street, slicing through the morning air like a knife. I could hear her even from my window, her indignant tone rising with each syllable. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is harassment." But the officers remained calm, their professional demeanor unshaken. One read her rights aloud in a steady, unwavering voice, each word falling like a hammer on the smooth veneer of her protests. Karen's face flushed a deep crimson, the veins at her temples pulsing visibly as her hands fluttered at her sides, her manicured nails glinting like tiny red flags of defiance. She attempted to step back inside, but the officers gently yet firmly restrained her, turning her around with practiced ease and snapping handcuffs around her wrists. The metallic clink of the cuffs echoed faintly, a small but powerful sound that seemed to resonate throughout the street, silencing the few murmured conversations that had begun to rise from behind twitching curtains and half-open doors. "I didn't do anything wrong," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking as her indignation gave way to desperation. "That dog is dangerous. I was protecting my property." Her words, once so sharp and commanding, now rang hollow, a brittle echo of the authority she had wielded for so long over the neighborhood. The officers guided her down the steps, her housecoat flaring dramatically with each step as though the very fabric of her self-importance were unraveling before our eyes. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from their homes, forming small knots of onlookers along the sidewalks. Some held their phones aloft, recording the scene with a mixture of disbelief and vindicated satisfaction. Others simply stood in silence, their faces a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, curiosity, and an undeniable sense of schadenfreude. I felt Max's head press more firmly against my leg, his quiet, grounding presence a stark contrast to the tumult outside. My hand found his fur, stroking it gently, and I realized I was holding my breath. The weight of the moment was palpable, not just for me, but for the entire community. This wasn't merely the arrest of a neighbor, it was a public reckoning, a rupture in the carefully maintained illusion of suburban harmony. As Karen was led to the patrol car, her protests grew more frantic, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that seemed to pierce the morning air. "You're making a mistake. I was only doing what any responsible homeowner would do. That dog, he's dangerous. He was trespassing. I was protecting myself." Her words rang out, but they were met with silence from the crowd. Even her staunchest supporters, those who had previously echoed her complaints, who had nodded along with her grievances during HOA meetings, stood in subdued silence, their gazes averted, their lips pressed into thin, uncertain lines. As the car door closed behind her, muffling her final protests, the squad cars began to pull away, their lights still flashing but their sirens silent, leaving behind a street that felt eerily quiet in their wake. The neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively, the tension that had coiled so tightly around us beginning to dissipate. Slowly, people turned back toward their homes, some exchanging quiet words of disbelief, others shaking their heads as if trying to process the surreal scene they had just witnessed. A few approached me tentatively, their steps hesitant, their expressions a mixture of contrition and cautious empathy. "I'm so sorry," one neighbor murmured, a middle-aged woman I barely knew, her voice soft with guilt. "I didn't realize. I didn't understand what happened until now." "If I'd known," she trailed off, her words unfinished but her sincerity evident. Another neighbor, a younger man with a toddler perched on his hip, offered a quiet nod of solidarity, his eyes flickering briefly to Max and then back to me. "If you need anything," he said simply, "just let us know." Their words, while comforting, couldn't erase the sting of isolation I had felt in the days since the incident. But they were a beginning, a tentative step toward healing the fractures that had appeared in the community's fabric. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond our neighborhood, carried by local news outlets that latched onto the dramatic narrative of a homeowner arrested for attacking a service dog. Reporters descended on the street, their vans parked haphazardly along the curbs, their cameras trained on Karen's now quiet home. Headlines blared across social media: local HOA leader arrested for assaulting veteran service dog, federal law invoked in service animal attack, neighborhood in shock as Karen faces charges. I was interviewed several times, each conversation a delicate balancing act between sharing the gravity of what had happened and maintaining my own dignity and Max's privacy. I spoke calmly, emphasizing that service animals were not pets but vital medical aids, that they provided an irreplaceable function for individuals like me living with PTSD. I just want people to respect service animals, I said into the microphones, my voice steady. They're not just pets, they're lifelines. Max, ever the stoic, remained by my side during each interview, his presence a quiet testament to resilience and trust. His recovery was steady, though the vet cautioned that the emotional impact of the incident might linger. I noticed him flinch slightly at sudden movements, his once relaxed demeanor now tinged with wariness, but with patience and care, his spirit slowly reasserted itself. We resumed our walks through the neighborhood, though now our path was marked by the glances of neighbors, some apologetic, others curious, a few openly supportive. The HOA, faced with mounting public scrutiny and internal dissent, held an emergency meeting to address the situation. The board, previously unyielding in its enforcement of trivial rules, found itself grappling with the fallout of Karen's actions and the broader implications for the neighborhood's reputation. Her staunchest allies distanced themselves, their previous complaints and accusations evaporating in the face of undeniable evidence and legal consequences. As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood slowly began to settle into a new normal. Karen's house, once a hub of activity and self-importance, now sat quiet and somber, her garden untended, her wind chimes silent in the breeze. The HOA meetings became more subdued, the air of petty enforcement replaced by a cautious awareness of the need for fairness and understanding. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now greeted Max and me with warm smiles and genuine kindness, their gestures a small but meaningful acknowledgement of the shared humanity that bound us all, regardless of past misunderstandings. Though the scars of the incident would take time to fully heal, both for Max and for the community, there was a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted, a recognition that cruelty and prejudice had no place in our shared spaces, and that justice, though sometimes slow and fraught, could indeed prevail. The day of the trial arrived with an overcast sky, the gray clouds mirroring the solemn atmosphere that seemed to envelop the courthouse and all those gathered there. I sat quietly in the hallway outside the courtroom, Max resting at my feet, his head on his paws, his large brown eyes gazing up at me with unwavering trust. He had healed physically, his golden fur glossy once more, his movements confident, but the shadow of Karen's attack lingered subtly in the way he glanced around at unfamiliar sounds, the slight hesitation when strangers approached. As we waited for the doors to open, a low murmur filled the corridor. Neighbors whispering among themselves, reporters adjusting cameras and microphones, attorneys conversing in hushed tones. I could feel the weight of the day pressing down on my shoulders, the culmination of weeks of legal proceedings, community debates, and personal anxiety. Today was about more than just justice for Max. It was about standing up for every person with a disability whose independence and safety depend on the loyalty and training of a service animal. When the courtroom doors finally opened, we filed inside, the space humming with anticipation as people settled into pew-like benches, their eyes drawn to the defendant's table where Karen sat, flanked by her lawyer. Her expression was a careful mask of contrition and indignation, but I could see the tightness in her jaw, the tension in her shoulders, and the flicker of defiance in her eyes. She was no longer the commanding figure who had once patrolled the neighborhood, issuing petty citations and enforcing arbitrary rules with self-righteous zeal. Here, in this chamber of law, she was just another defendant, subject to the same justice she had once believed herself above. The prosecution began with a quiet but powerful opening outlining the sequence of events, presenting the evidence, and emphasizing the significance of Max's role as a federally protected service animal. Video footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera was played on a large screen, the grainy but unmistakable images capturing Karen's aggressive approach, her deliberate spraying of pesticide directly onto Max, and her dismissive wave as she turned away. The courtroom was silent except for the low hum of the video and the occasional gasp from observers as the reality of her actions played out before them. The defense attorney argued that Karen had acted impulsively, that she had not intended to harm Max or violate federal law, but his words rang hollow against the undeniable evidence. Witnesses testified, neighbors who had seen Karen's confrontations, the veterinarian who had treated Max, and Officer Daniels, who recounted his investigation and the decision to pursue charges under both state animal cruelty statutes and federal disability protections. Each testimony layered the narrative, painting a picture of a woman who had crossed a line not just of common decency, but of legal and moral responsibility. I was called to testify, my heart pounding as I rose to take the stand, Max obediently following and sitting beside me. I spoke of the day Karen had attacked him, of the fear and helplessness I had felt as my trusted companion was doused in chemicals, of the sleepless nights and the careful recovery that followed. I explained what Max meant to me. Not just a dog, but a lifeline, a guardian against the shadows of PTSD, a steady presence in a world that often felt overwhelming. I described the isolation I had felt in the days after the incident, the quiet support from some neighbors, the pointed silences from others, the way Max's gentle resilience had kept me grounded amidst the swirling chaos. As I spoke, I noticed the jurors watching me with rapt attention, some nodding slightly in understanding, others frowning in quiet indignation. When I returned to my seat, Max pressed his head against my leg, as though reassuring me that we were in this together, that we would emerge from this trial stronger and more resolute. After days of testimony, arguments, and cross-examinations, the judge, an older woman with a reputation for fairness and a deep understanding of disability rights, delivered her verdict. Her voice was steady, her words measured but resolute as she declared Karen guilty on all counts: animal cruelty, harassment, and violating federal protections for service animals under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The sentence was clear and decisive. A substantial fine, a year of probation including mandatory community service focused on disability education and animal welfare, and, most notably, a 3-month jail term to reflect the severity of her actions. The courtroom murmured with subdued approval, the tension in the air finally breaking as justice was rendered. Karen's face crumpled, her carefully constructed facade shattering into disbelief and humiliation. Her lawyers' whispered reassurances did little to soothe her, and as she was led away to begin the formalities of her sentencing, I felt a profound sense of closure, not triumph, not vengeance, but the quiet, steady satisfaction of knowing that the law had upheld what was right. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood underwent a subtle but significant transformation. The story of Karen's arrest and conviction rippled through the community, a cautionary tale that transcended petty HOA disputes and reached into the core values of empathy, respect, and accountability. Karen's house, once a symbol of her domineering presence, stood empty and silent, a for sale sign planted firmly in the front yard. Prospective buyers toured the property with cautious curiosity, some whispering about the incident that had unfolded there, others shaking their heads at the thought of living in a house marked by such a notorious past. The HOA board, chastened by the publicity and the legal scrutiny, began to adopt a more transparent and collaborative approach, hosting meetings that emphasized community well-being over enforcement of trivial regulations. Residents who had once been divided by Karen's tactics found common ground in supporting inclusive policies, ensuring that those with service animals felt welcomed and protected. Max and I resumed our daily walks, his steps once again confident, his tail wagging with quiet joy as we strolled past homes where neighbors now greeted us with genuine warmth and occasional words of apology or support. Some even approached me with questions about service animals, how they were trained, what rights they were entitled to, how the community could better accommodate them. I shared what I could, grateful for the opportunity to transform a painful experience into a teachable moment, to foster a culture of understanding and respect. Max, ever the patient ambassador, allowed children to pet him under my guidance, his calm demeanor a testament to his resilience and his essential role in my life. Over time, the whispers and sideways glances faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance that spoke louder than any public statement or headline. As for Karen, she never returned to the neighborhood. Her departure was marked only by the quiet removal of her belongings and the fading of her once prominent presence. Her story became a legend of sorts, a whispered reminder that arrogance and cruelty could lead to real consequences, that no amount of HOA authority or personal bluster could shield one from accountability. The legal precedent set by her case reverberated beyond our community, cited in advocacy discussions and disability rights forums as an example of how federal protections for service animals could and should be enforced. Max and I, though forever changed by the experience, found peace in the knowledge that we had stood up not just for ourselves, but for others who might face similar challenges. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Max and I walked past Karen's old house, now occupied by a young family with children who played noisily in the yard. A new beginning had taken root there, one untainted by hostility or resentment. Max paused, his nose twitching at the familiar scents, then continued on, his tail wagging steadily. I followed, feeling the weight of the past lift incrementally with each step, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude for the resilience of my loyal companion and the community's capacity for growth and change. Together, we walked into the fading light, a quiet symbol of the enduring power of justice, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between a person and their service dog.